For the longest time, we've been taught that managing money is this hard, cold science, that it's all about complex math formulas, high IQs, and somehow perfectly timing the market. But the data reveals something completely different. Doing well with money, it's not actually about what you know. It's a soft skill driven almost entirely by how you behave. So let's dive right into this explainer on the behavioral architecture of financial success and uncover exactly how patient habits are what really build wealth. Chapter 1, The Millionaire Janitor Paradox. To really prove this core thesis, just think about the sheer improbability of these two very different lives. First, we have Ronald Read. He spent his entire life working as a gas station attendant and a janitor. Nothing flashy, right? Yet he quietly amassed an $8 million fortune. How? Simply by practicing patient habits and letting long-term compounding do the heavy lifting. Then, contrast him with Richard Visconti. Now, Richard was a highly educated, top-tier financial executive. He literally had every advantage in the world, yet he ended up going completely bankrupt. He lost everything to greed and over-leverage. And this brings us to a really foundational truth. Wealth is a soft skill. It's not about memorizing spreadsheets or having a fancy Ivy League degree. Doing well with money is driven by emotional behavior, patience, and extreme discipline. The millionaire janitor didn't outperform the hotshot executive because he was smarter. He outperformed him because he cultivated character traits like humility and patience, while the executive completely let his ego drive his decisions. So if it's really all about behavior, why do so many incredibly smart people get it wrong? That brings us to Chapter 2, Comforting Lies and Pessimism. Well, we fall into psychological traps because we desperately want to believe what experts call appealing fictions. We have this intense human need to believe the world is controllable. Number one is the illusion of predictability. This is exactly why we listen to confident TV pundits who can't actually predict the future, but they scratch that itch we have for certainty. Number two is the risk-free miracle. Think of those narrative-driven scams like Bernie Madoff promising zero volatility. Number three is the whole "this time it's different" mentality. We've all felt that FOMO during a crypto boom, right? We just buy right into comforting half-truths. And four, the lottery. Mathematically, it makes absolutely zero sense, but people play it to purchase the feeling of hope. But on the flip side of these hopeful fictions is the total seduction of pessimism. We are evolutionarily wired for loss aversion. Think about it. If someone tells you a stock is going to grow tenfold, you probably just think they're a dreamer. But if they predict a total, catastrophic collapse, boom, they have your full, undivided attention. We prioritize threats over opportunities because, historically speaking, that instinct is exactly what kept our ancestors alive. And this bias is amplified by a really simple rule. Setbacks happen quickly and loudly, but progress happens slowly and quietly. A 40% market crash happens practically overnight. It captures every single headline and absolutely dominates the news cycle. But the quiet miracle of compounding progress, like 140% gain over 6 years, or the steady decline of heart disease, that takes decades to unfold. It goes completely unnoticed in the daily news, which is exactly why building patient habits is just so incredibly difficult. Our brains are hardwired to react to the loud crashes, not the quiet growth. So if we can actually manage to avoid these psychological traps, how do we actually build wealth? Let's look at Chapter 3, The Power of Patient Habits. Check out this massive figure, 99%. That is the percentage of Warren Buffett's staggering wealth that was accumulated after his 50th birthday. Seriously, 99%. It's a mind-blowing statistic, and it proves that time in the market, not just chasing high returns, is the ultimate heavy lifter. Buffett began investing as a child and simply never stopped. His secret wasn't perfectly timing the market. It was the patient habit of never interrupting the process. Because when you stay in the market over time, you benefit from what we call tail events. Just look at the venture capital world. A massive 65% of investments actually lose money. Another 34.5% just break even or make tiny, negligible gains. But that tiny 0.5% sliver, those return 50 times the investment and literally drive almost all the gains for the entire industry. In finance, a super tiny fraction of investments drives the vast majority of all returns. And this brilliantly illustrates a core principle from investor George Soros. He says, it's not whether you're right or wrong that's important, but how much money you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong. Because of those explosive tail events, you can literally be wrong half the time and still make an absolute fortune. It takes the immense pressure off having to be perfect, as long as your rare winners are significant enough to carry the whole portfolio. But to let those tail events actually work, You have to survive long enough to see them. Which takes us to Chapter 4, Building Your Margin of Safety. We are so often taught to be purely rational, to build these mathematically perfect, highly leveraged financial plans. But here's the catch. Rational plans are usually emotionally exhausting, and they're exactly what cause you to panic and sell during a crash. Instead, you really need to aim for a reasonable plan. A reasonable strategy might not be mathematically perfect on a spreadsheet, but it is emotionally sustainable. A reasonable strategy passes the sleep at night test, giving you the actual emotional endurance you need to maintain those patient habits for decades. So, how do we actually build this reasonable margin of safety? First, you have to plan for the plan not to go to plan. Just acknowledge right up front that the world is entirely unpredictable. Second, build in conservative assumptions. Assume your returns are going to be about 1/3 lower than the historical average. And third, build a 20% cash buffer. You've got to think of cash as your financial oxygen tank. It ensures you are never forced to sell your stocks during a market panic just to cover a broken water heater or some sudden medical emergency. This buffer is absolutely crucial because it keeps you away from what we call the 95% trap. Basically, never take a 5% risk of total ruin, even for a 95% chance of success. If that 5% risk wipes you out completely, the high probability of winning doesn't matter at all. Survival is the absolute prerequisite for success. You literally must eliminate single points of failure so that compounding can work its magic uninterrupted. Now, as we reach the climax of this explainer, we have to ask the ultimate question. What is all this survival and compounding actually for? Let's wrap up with Chapter 5, The Psychology of Enough. We need to completely redefine what wealth actually is. Society tells us that being rich is what you can see, the luxury goods, the big houses, the flashy vacations. But true wealth, it's invisible wealth. It is the money you haven't spent. It's the sports car not purchased. It's the first-class upgrade you turned down. True wealth is the unspent assets that provide you with future options and ultimate flexibility. And why is visible richness such a trap? It's because of the man-in-the-car paradox. People buy expensive luxury items because they want admiration and respect from others. But the paradox is observers totally ignore the driver. They're just looking at the Ferrari and imagining themselves in it. Spending money just to look wealthy is a trap based on a desire for status that no one actually gives you. True respect is earned through humility, not horsepower. And this brings us to the ego gap. Think of your income on one side and your ego, which drives your visible spending, on the other. The space between them? That is your actual wealth. Wealth is simply the gap between your income and your ego. And honestly, this is amazing news because it means you don't necessarily need some massive salary to build wealth. You can build it so much faster simply by raising your humility and keeping your lifestyle in check. So the crucial takeaway here is understanding the true purpose of that wealth gap. The highest dividend money pays is the ability to control your own time. It is not about buying more stuff. It's about buying independence. It's the freedom to wake up every single morning and say, I can do whatever I want today with whoever I want for as long as I want. That right there is the ultimate goal. To make sure you're aiming for time rather than just chasing a higher net worth, run the future regret test. First, evaluate your deathbed regrets. Really think deeply about this. Most people do not regret missing an extra $1 million. They regret missing family dinners. Second, focus on your eulogy virtues, being a good parent, a loyal friend, rather than your resume virtues. And finally, stop moving the financial goalposts. Don't let your expectations rise in lockstep with your income, or you will constantly feel this exhausting sense of scarcity. Which leaves us with one final vital question. Have you defined your enough? Unchecked ambition will lead you to risk what you already have and need for things you don't have and don't actually need. The absolute most important patient habit you can ever master is recognizing your own personal point of satisfaction. So I'll leave you to think about that. Have you defined yours?